My opponent, whom I have a great deal of respect for, is smart, he's tough, he's energetic, and he wants to be mayor. And he wants to be mayor. My job is to run a great campaign, ask you to please help me, and I thank you for being here. But I need help on a lot of different fronts. And let me just tell you, of course, campaigns are expensive, and so thank you for making a contribution. And if you haven't made a contribution, I hope you will. Also, we're going to run a very volunteer-intensive campaign, so we need volunteers in the office. If you don't like to go out knocking door-to-door canvassing, you know, some people love that, some people don't. We have lots of work in the office in terms of mail and phones. But then there's also another area where we need some help, and that is some of you in this room actually are involved in small businesses, right? Some of you in this room are actually working on reentry programs. You have an opportunity, if you choose to work with me to help shape the policies for the next 4 years. And I'm inviting you to actually work with me to do that. One person does not have all the answers to all the city's problems, but one way that we can get there is if we actually all pull together and based on our experience. You know, when you have the experts on public transportation in the room, I don't need to pretend to be an expert in bus systems, but we do need to build one out. So, need your help. I thank you for being here. I also want to make sure that Cedric and Melanie, where did you disappear to? Yeah, get the recognition that they're due again, and so thank them very much for bringing us all together.
We did want to open it up for questions. Questions at this point.
Yes, please.
Is it just one question?
This is an open dialogue. This is the real purpose, to be able to...
Okay, so Roxanne, for me, the question is that you have been around for a long time. And
you have been emphasized.
And so part of the good work that happened in the city within the last 12 years is, you should know, the collaborative agreement.
Yes.
One of the things that I highly disagree with you on is the merging of the sheriff and the police, because for African Americans, we've had a long history of bias policing with them, and the collaborative and the MOU with the Justice Department helped us to reform the police department and help try to foster better community police relations based on the class listed in that agreement. Are you still pushing for that? One on that. And because our current city manager was a huge proponent of what we had done here in Cincinnati and embraced the work as it related to the police and the Black community and has been at the table since he's come.
Yes.
Are you considering him to stay on as city manager? And first question, are you still trying to look at merging the sheriff? Because you know the collaborative has no juice under the sheriff department.
That is a very good question. I'm glad you answered it so I can answer it. Both of them. When that proposal to look at potentially merging the city and the county, the city police with the county sheriff, those of us who brought it forward, including Mr. Young, we said 3 things. We said, we want to look at this. 1, to see if it saves money. 2, if it reduces crime. And 3, if it were to do those things, then the sheriff would have to agree to abide by the collaborative agreement. We actually said those things. And so the intention never was, if the sheriff said no, which ultimately he said, no, I'm not going to abide by the collaborative agreement, which is not surprising that he said that, but but that was the criteria as we were looking. So that's my answer to it. Our intention never was that we would throw the collaborative agreement aside just for the sake of the merger.
But the signatures were CPE, ACLU, Black and Underfront, and so those were the signatures on it, and all of the reforms, all of the changes happened under Cincinnati Police, not under sheriff. 2 different types of
Right, right, which is why we recognized that it was very important that the collaborative agreement could not be overthrown in any discussions that we were pursuing.
Yeah, so I don't know if that answers my question, if you still are looking.
No, I'm not.
Okay.
No,
Okay.
no, I'm explaining the prior thing, but no, the answer to your question is, no, I am not making that proposal.
And the second part.
And the second thing, actually, you know, Milton, how many of you have had an opportunity to work with Milton Dehoney? You know, he's very interesting because in some ways it can be very, not immediately obvious how smart he is and how really skilled he is in terms of dealing with not just the big issues, but also balancing a lot of very conflicted situations. And I have grown since I have been on council since 2007 to respect and admire him, quite frankly. And so, unless he were to prove himself otherwise, I do not see any reason to replace him as city manager. He has done a great job selecting the new police chief. He's done a great job selecting the new fire chief. He has done a great job replacing a number of other directors of departments. I think, unfortunately, as someone who has great leadership skills, he is, you know, incredibly constrained because of the deficit issues. But you also have to admire him on the other hand. Quite frankly, I don't know how a man actually manages to get out of bed and not be depressed, because he has come forward consistently since he was appointed city manager with proposals that would actually generate revenues for the city that have been rejected consistently. I think that this parking proposal, there was a lot of hue and outcry when it was originally brought forward. He went out into the community, he listened to the community. The proposal changed significantly. He brought it back, and we're still trying to fight to make it happen, because he really doesn't want to decimate city services, which a $35 million cut is going to do.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Since you indicated that you've been around a long time, we're just going to go on with that. And it looks like the city has kind of ceded its development authority to the Port Authority and CCDC, I think that's the downtown entity. So when we began to look at neighborhood development and how that occurs, and it's a partnership between the city and the county in terms of development with Port Authority. So when we look at how development occurs in the neighborhoods and how we engage people in the neighborhoods in terms of development, and the issue of inclusion and the issue of job creation are all issues that continue to come up every year. And in order to continue to secure the votes of the communities that you seek votes from, since you identified first some practical accomplishments that you've had in those areas, and could you begin to tell us how communities, independent development corporations, or individuals who are interested and want to do development projects can be confident that the city will continue to support those projects?
Well, the city, just let me explain a little bit about the Port Authority first, so that everybody is clear. The Port Authority is a creation of the city and the county. Okay, so it doesn't just exist out there on its own. And what the city has done is it has charged the Port Authority with responsibility for implementing the Go Cincinnati plan, which targets basically the Reading Road, Seymour Avenue corridors, targets Madison Road, Red Bank Road, and targets Queensgate, Lower Mill Creek for redevelopment. In addition to that, the Port Authority, because it runs the land bank, is in charge of land banking vacant and abandoned properties that have gone to sheriff's sale and been foreclosed, sheriff's foreclosure, so that it's taken into the land bank. it was not expecting to actually have such a major role in neighborhoods, quite frankly, in the beginning. But what we are now finding is because it's taken on such a major role as the land banking group, it is working with many neighborhood-based organizations and development corporations to help them implement their strategies. So for example, Evanston. Evanston has a major housing strategy, but in order to achieve it, it needs to be able to not just see certain blighted and abandoned buildings and properties torn down. It also needs to make sure that those properties, once it's demolished and the site is cleared, actually go into a land bank so that it can be redeveloped. And so they're working, Evanston is working with the Port Authority to do that, but also with the Walnut Hills Redevelopment Foundation as the local development corporation. If you look at Avondale, exciting things are happening in Avondale. You should know that. And you know, you've been reading some of it. But in terms of grants that Avondale community has received and some of the work that they are doing with the community builders is very exciting, not just along Reading Road, but also off of Reading Road. But they also are working with the Port Authority to be very strategic about gathering vacant, abandoned, blighted properties and making them part of the redevelopment. Madisonville is doing the same thing, College Hill is doing it, so they're working with a lot of neighborhoods, so it's not just... The other thing, this is back to when I was talking about wealth creation, which is very exciting, is, for example, at Jordan's Crossing, with the redevelopment of Jordan's Crossing, one of the things which the Port Authority is seeking to do as part of being consistent with our goals for inclusion is to really go out aggressively and recruit investors within the African American community who would also bring, as part of that, a major anchor into that development and be major participants in the actual development of Jordan's Crossing. That's a focus. You know, that's still in process. There isn't a result at this point, but that is actually a real goal to make sure that that begins to be incorporated in all the developments, that opportunities are created. Again, not just for work and employment, which the Port Authority is very good at, but also for wealth creation and participation. Yes, ma'am.
This brings to mind a number of things. Gosh, there's so many questions popping in my head that I'm trying to narrow this down to. When you said the Port Authority is responsible for land banks, so things that have been foreclosed on, and they are there, or they've made it a part of their vision to help large corporations implement their plans. I know Forbes said that Cincinnati was one of the fastest growing. We made their list. But minority-owned businesses, we suck. Women's-owned businesses, we suck. So if we're growing, then we're growing because of large corporations. And I'm wondering if the Port Authority, since they are helping large corporations acquire land banks, is it at the expense of small businesses, and they're using us as employees? Because that's not stable. That's not, you know, wealth is really good. Being a business owner rather than an employee.
But the Port Authority isn't, that's not what I said. In terms of the land banking, they're working with neighborhood groups, not corporations. They're working with neighborhood groups and local neighborhood-based development corporations.
Okay, that makes sense. Now, I remember Corinthian, and I know when they bought the land, Port Authority wanted it back. It didn't work. Too late, but they wanted to take it. So what I'm wondering is, if, I wish you were even sitting down so we could have this windless thing going. Because guys' phones can come up. Somewhere we have to unite together. piecing your mind together. And one of the things I wondered is, even that there's so many different issues that, you try to put your finger on the pulse and understand where you're coming from. Like the thing that happened with that Glencoe project, I know that's your project, but when I think about it, you supported it for such a long time, and then the big corporation was able to come in, or the big business was able to come in. What I wanted to know is, what did you think? Because sometimes you have to make concessions, I understand, for the collective. But I wanted to know, how did you feel about it? And, what could have been done? What could have been done? Because I know eminent domain, when they take your land, they give you something to help you relocate. What happens when it's a private entity? And why isn't it, with eminent domain, they will give you relocation dollars? But when it's private, they can just stick the knife in, twist it, and, do like a lot of the things that have happened with the great large corporations. Pink slips and steal your retirement. They're ruthless. What did you think? When things switch, how did you personally feel about it? And what could have been done? And how are we safe, in this, if we're up against the big guns and they can stretch it out and they have the big dollars and the attorneys?
It's very challenging. And they have the big dollars and the attorneys, as we're seeing even now with the analytics.
Another thing. So what did you think about that? Because that was a minority-owned business. And it's black, double minority, black, female-owned business. What happened? How did you feel about it? I mean, what did you think? Were you up against the wall? I mean, because a lot of times, if we know where you're coming from, then it gives us a position to stand on to help you guys forward. Because I think the power starts at the top, down here. And we can force the issue, but we need to know where you stand.
But I think that, as Pauline will say, very early on, I was a supporter of Glencoe. And as things devolved between the holder of the mortgage balloon and also Christ Hospital, there were lots of pressures that came to bear on that property. And there was not the support on the council. And that became very, the support started peeling away and eroding.
So you're saying that you're gunned, or did you follow it? Because when you stretch it out for so
At that point,
long,
we
you
now
hold
have
on.
to be part of it, because there was not the votes to keep it up.
If they're able to stretch it out long enough, then, as mayor, would you be able to shut that down and say, you know what, and let them drag this out?
Well, part of the challenge is whether, in terms of what their actual kind of legal abilities are. So an example is, for example, with the Animal Museum. Right now, everything that's being done to the labor project, which is actually a dangerous project, quite frankly, is all
Strategies.
but they're all able to legally do it. It's not that they're stepping outside of legal boundaries. They're able to pursue certain legal things, appeals and challenges, and which basically run the clock.
Isn't there a mediator that says, you know what, here we've got this great big piece of land that will allow you to double the services that you do here in Louisiana, just in case they strategize and just take it and we don't have any of those services? Isn't there some kind of mediator that comes in and says, look, okay, this is what they do. Let's find another spot so that they can double and triple the number of lives they affect. And because there's got to be a win-win.
Well, there has to.
Well,
I think everybody would hope that there's a win-win, but that's really a choice of the two parties whether or not they're going to mediate. And right now, the two parties haven't made that choice. Maybe they will, and if so, I think everybody would be very supportive of a mediated settlement that actually serves both organizations and serves the women. I mean, who should be the focus. But right now, that's that's the choice that the two parties have to make in order to do that.
I think I can put some context to it. I really want to, because I am a small business owner, and Roxanne, we've known each other for 20 years. I was a supporter of yours when you first got elected to city council. You gave me a key to the city for my development work in Mount Auburn. And I have noticed that you've been very strong in your position on Anna Louisiana. You think, as most people do, that it's reprehensible for Western Southern, a big, dominant, wealthy corporate entity, to look next door at a smaller business and say, I want what you've got, and I'm going to squeeze you out. I wish you would have given me the same consideration and held my company to the same standard of support, because yes, indeed, you supported me. You wrote a 10-page memo to the mayor about everything that had gone before and how the city had sabotaged my project. But when the Christ Hospital came to the city and said, after 5 years of torture and hell and 10 years of my company's effort and $4 million cash invested for a $25 million transformational project for Mount Auburn, that had the support of the community, and the Christ Hospital came to the city and said, don't go forward with this project, because we want that property for our expansion. Oh, and by the way, they said in a public meeting, you were there, and 9 other people, and we're not going to pay you anything for it. We are going to get it on a short sale from the bank because we know she is underwater. And at that point, when you said to the Christ Hospital, when you said to me, Pauline, having looked at the Christ Hospital's plan for their $350 million expansion, 200 new jobs, there's no way that I can support your project now, and the city won't put the money in, you have to go work it out with them. And I can just tell you, Roxanne, in that moment, I was devastated. I felt abandoned and betrayed. And I, and everybody in that room, understood that every bit of leverage and negotiating power that I had just been stripped away, because when you withdrew your support, the 4 or 5 Democrats went with you. It could have been handled differently. You could have broken the deal and said, look, this developer has spent 10 years and $4 million on this project based on the City of Cincinnati's commitment, 5 ordinances, multiple motions and resolutions. Let's at least make her whole.
I think, Pauline, and I understand because it was very traumatic, but there were not 5 Democrats at the time, and there were not 5 presidents.
But that's all immaterial. I mean, and here's what I'm getting to now, because it's really regrettable that there wasn't any effort to prevent the gross harm that was done to my company. As a result of that action, I lost my 20-year-old business, I lost my home, my 83-year-old partner's mother lost her home. Many small investors lost their investment, all because of that decision to chuck me back to the Christ Hospital, who just said they wanted to steal my property. But it's a new day. So in other words, a small development company was obliterated. Obliterated, wiped off the map. But it's a new day, and now you're here, you're running for mayor. And I would like to personally know, and I think other people would as well, why I should put my trust and confidence in you, that you will do the right thing by small businesses. What wasn't done right by me to prevent a harm, and the city hasn't made any effort since to right the harm, but it's a new day. And I invite you to take your leadership, Roxanne, and bring about a satisfactory resolution to that gross injustice of the situation.
And what, from your perspective, would be a satisfactory resolution?
Well, we would definitely have to have a conversation, and I would like to invite some other people into that conversation. But at a very minimum, the city had a moral obligation to make me whole. The city knew the Christ Hospital wanted my property, just like Western Southern now wants Anna Louisiana, and people are up in arms about that. Here I am, a small business owner, a black female developer, a very rare breed in this city. I'm out on my own, and I'm being forced to go reckon with the Christ Hospital. And of course they didn't reckon with me. They figured they'd just wait me out like they said they were going to do that fateful day. So it would, at a minimum, require, yes, I need to be made whole financially. And as far as all my expertise and my skills as a developer, they should still be put to good use, because I, like every other woman in this room, have the right to make a positive contribution in this city and use my God-given gifts, my vision, and my skills and my experience to make a contribution in the city. As it is right now, my credit went down the tubes, my money went down the tubes, and all my assets were lost, so that needs to be restored. That's what I'm inviting you to take the leadership on.
Do you have any ideas on policies that could be developed to protect women business owners, small business owners? Are there ideas that you've had? Now this is the second situation with Anna Louise House, so obviously there has to be some thought that you put into what it is that you could or would do on a policy level to prevent and protect.
Well, I think a couple things. One, Anna Louise is different because that actually is not an individual. That's it's a Union Bethel institution, and so. But the question in terms of small businesses and women-owned businesses and minority-owned businesses is one that is very important. And so when you're talking about policies, I think that what you have to do is you have to back up a little bit and really look at what the city itself is trying to do in terms of small businesses. As you know, and this is within our own business that we're doing, we are trying to look very carefully at the very poor performance of the city, quite frankly, when it comes to women and minority-owned businesses, and a large measure of that has to do with the fact that the city doesn't have a specific program for MBE, WBE, but it's an SBE program. And right now we're looking at, one, whether or not we should actually pursue a process study and what that would mean to do it, because without doing a process study we can't have a specific MBE or WBE program. And the administration at this point feels very strongly that, and Wendell, I don't know if you know this, is that they actually would support a process study.
They would.
They don't know what the outcome would be, but they feel that whatever the outcome, what they would learn in the midst of doing it would actually help them develop the type of programs that would increase women and minority participation in city contracting, professional services, those types of things. Now, on the other issue, you have the whole thing in terms of women and minority, just small businesses, and the type of support that the city should be giving to those organizations, to those businesses, and to those individuals. We've not done, that good of a job, quite frankly, historically, in large measure because one, resources, and increasingly not having the staff to support that. Right now, we are waiting on the recommendations of actually a small business task force that has been comprehensive. It's been led by Councilmember Yvette Simpson. They have been looking at not just the individual-owned business, but kind of small business all the way up the line, and what the city's specific actions the city could take to actually improve access, address issues of capital, what would the role of the city be, and that's going to be forthcoming, and right now we're waiting on that to happen. So I'm looking forward to that because I think it's going to provide some very direct and clear policy direction in this area.
Roxanne,
Yes, ma'am.
going back to Jordan Cross, you mentioned earlier that you mentioned investment, wealth, growth. You're looking for possibly an anchor tenant there, minority investment. Could you elaborate on maybe perhaps specifically what kind of establishment you're looking for there, what they're thinking about there? If someone has someone in mind, who do they contact, who do they negotiate with?
But if you think about it, it's the vision for Jordan Crossing, and it's an evolving vision, is that it is going to be mixed commercial, retail, residential. And so when they're talking about major anchors, it would be major commercial, or perhaps even major retail. And the person to make contact with, if you have any interest or any possibilities, would be to just call up Bill O'Brien, who's the president and CEO of the Port Authority, and say, you know, we'd like more information about this and what's actually going on, because, you know, part of the commitment of the city and the commitment of the port, and Laura as president in charge of it, is to really make sure that as we do these things, as we make these major investments, that we open up, unlike as we have not done in the past, you know, the opportunities to everybody in the community. And we've seen some, you know, some interesting things happen in terms of, more recently on some major developments, groups of investors coming together, individuals who may not in and of themselves be such high wealth individuals that on their own they could invest, but they come together as groups and are able to bring the investment to the table. That happened at the casino. You know, and that's really, you know, so looking at new avenues that give people others who might have more money, you know, the opportunity to grow that.
Roxanne, is there a group like that that is being set up or considered to bring women together like that? You talk about maybe, you know, I hate to use the word call them because that seems simple, but, you know, bringing women together and giving them an opportunity to become developers or become business owners that way. Yeah, I think that would be interesting. If that hasn't already happened, I'd love to be part of that discussion. That would be exciting.
Well, you should actually pull that together.
I look at what Candace Klein is doing with Bad Girl Ventures and bringing the discussion together, bringing all the resources together to help women start, I would say more retail or smaller, but I think it would be really exciting to see,
Bring
especially
together
listening
people
to what
as an
you're
investment
talking
group.
about. Yeah, and I would love that. That would be, so yeah, I take your challenge.
No, I mean, I think because I think that there are people in this room who might be interested in doing that.
Wouldn't that be great?
And to make the contact so that when there are the opportunities, people know that there are the opportunities. That's the biggest issue, is most people.
Especially with a talent like Laura. I mean, you've met Laura before. Laura is extremely compelling, a wealth of background, tax background. I don't know her dossier or resume, but on my level, the simple folk level, you know, how can we get involved? How can we take a piece of that pie and grow our wealth and grow, especially as a woman? So I don't know how we can continue this conversation, but I would like to be a part of that.
Now, would be a very good conversation for anybody who's interested.
Excellent.
And I hate to interject, but we got time for about one more question before we wrap up.
Thank you for coming to speak to us. Thank you. But our city council has done not a great job with addressing issues in the African American community. I think the lowest vote getter in this past election was Chris Silbach, and I think followed by Christopher Smithman. And I just want to say, I feel like like I said, the African American community has been ignored. I was really hurt by what happened to Pauline, also to Liz Rogers, just people not supporting those two businesses. But what I want to say is I'm going to knock on, if it took Chris Silbach 23,000 votes to get elected, as we are part of the group, and as Women United, I'm going to knock on either 23,000 doors or help knock on 23,000 doors to get somebody elected or to get them kicked out of the office. So I hope...
Go for getting someone
Okay.
elected.
Well,
someone will lose as a result anyway, but
I just hope you do to address like the issue, more issues in Avondale. While there are some great things happening in Avondale.
Where you used to live in Avondale, right?
yes,
Yeah.
Ridgeway.
And I live on Ridgeway as well. And my mom...
Where do you live on Ridgeway?
757 Ridgeway.
860.
Woo-hoo! But my mom still, and the streets are horrible.
I was down there.
Litter, blight, everything. So what do you specifically do to make sure Avondale is not, and I know under OZ, there's some great things happening in Avondale, but with Pauline, I think I'm going to be looking to see what council people will look at making her whole. With Liz Rogers, even with the Tracy Hunter situation, I want Democrats to stand up for Tracy Hunter. Right. So I'm going to be looking at what, do you have any thoughts on just what you can do to make sure that our African American communities aren't ignored?
Well, I think that Well, first of all,
Anymore, yeah, anymore.
but also I think given this council and given who's on it, including Wendell and Cecil, you know, and also, I mean, you have to give credit where credit is due. I mean, Charlie Winburn and Chris Goodman.
No, not Christmas.
Oh, but in the sense of, and to that, you know, of focusing, you know, as advocates and actually, you know, when issues present the opportunity to basically say, you know, this is fine, but you must also remember that we have to, that we're including in here the entire community, not just a little piece of the community. And that's been, I think, very important. And so while there can be disagreements perhaps on method and all that type of stuff, just the fact that that is persistently and consistently being said and raised is really important, I think, for consciousness. But then the second thing is we have to actually look at how do we, one, create the resources to invest. And so this Focus 52 fund is really important because while on the one hand, it sets aside basically $4 million in casino revenues, what's important about that is that that gets bonded. And so it actually creates $52 million worth of investment opportunity. And that is targeted for the neighborhood. So for example, in Avondale, you know, it's not just a matter of the Martin Luther King interchange and, you know, the research park at all. It is actually in partnership with the Avondale Community Council, the Redevelopment Corporation, the Uptown Consortium, with looking at how to holistically leverage that investment and make sure that Avondale improves for the folks who are currently living there in terms of renovating, you know, affordable housing there, but also creating the type of market rate opportunities that would result in, you know, you or me making movie back, right? You know, and also creating the opportunities so that the folks who are actually working in those institutions might actually choose to live in Avondale. And that's really the strategy behind that. And it has to be a strategy because you're not going to improve the community unless people move.
So the Port Authority has bonding authority.
I'm sorry?
Port Authority has bonding authority.
Port Authority has bonding authority? Yeah.
One last quick question, because I know you had one.
I don't know if it's really a question, but, you know, start trouble.
Well, everybody knows who the answer
Right. And it's really not a question, it's just an observation when you're on the ground level and then you're working with higher ups who adjust policy. I think one of the unrealistic expectation of us in a community is instant gratification, and it doesn't happen in government.
Yes.
So when we understand that, and the problem is we take the whole pie to government and say we want you to eat this pie instead of taking one sliver at a time and working our way to get the whole pie eaten. And that's how you accomplish change, and change that's sustainable. So when we start addressing issues, and if we want SBE, MBE, WBE programs, we have to start back all the way out of it to say, how do we even get there? And by getting there is voting to get the study done. Once the study's done, where do we move from the study? We can't go in and say, well, this is what we want off of these results today. It doesn't work in government. And I think I share it because I work with a population that's the pink elephant in the room that nobody wanted to pay attention to. And today we pay attention to it. And I have no problems with any council member about this issue, about individuals returning to prison, but because I didn't take the whole pie to council, I took a sliver at a time. And once you take the sliver at a time, you get individuals to understand the issue, and then you get to add the next layer to the pie. And once they eat the whole pie, they get to see the whole situation. So I think as a community, when we want things as women, and we want things done, we have to understand what we're facing and what the individuals we're taking it to are facing when they try to put it forward. So that's just me.
Thank you, Deanna.
One last comment from Ms. Iris.
I love Deanna, but I disagree. Avondale's been neglected for way over 25, 30 years. That's just a fact. It's not a farce. This is a fact. Is it possible, this is for Rudolph and you, just think about. So we had 2 person studies done, and the recommendations from the last one in 2000 could have not been something that we could have looked at and taken from and implemented, even though something happened legally with it. The recommendations were fabulous, and we would have set us to a higher plane these last 10 years. We could have been really moving forward, but it seems as if when we are talking about the African American community, the other elephant in the room, because if access is there, we won't have folk going to jail, we won't have folk dropping out of school, we will see people, we are human beings. I am a I'm not small, micro business owner. I do all the political science. I've never seen you in my business. I've been in business 12 years. I'm just saying. This is who we are. We are human beings who are contributors also, and we pay taxes. So some of our issues have been out there for a long time. I am now fighting for things my grandmother fought for, and she is now gone and transitioned on. Her name is ViBE, and she fought a very long time in this city for women and for African Americans. So some of our issues have been decades long. I'm just saying. So the question is, the 2,000-person study, the recommendations that came from that, was that a possibility to use some of those solutions so that the African American community could have a plan and sort on that, on those solutions?
That is a good question. Unfortunately, I wasn't there in 2000, 2002. We didn't come back until 2007. And by the time we came back, we had an SBE program that was put in place. And if there had been the opportunity, that would have happened immediately after 2002, which is, I think, when it was over, when the then Mayor Charlie Lucan basically said, we're not going to pursue Frozen. I think that's what happened, which is one of the reasons why we are moving quickly to the position of actually redoing the Frozen study. And with an administration that's saying, even if under the strict requirements of Frozen, you can't produce a WBE or MBE program, the information which they will learn in doing it in terms of what needs to happen, they would be able to then take that information and implement, which is very similar to what you were saying. It's like, well, why did that happen? I can't answer that question.
But they won't tie the results to it. They won't say, okay, at this time, if we do it, if we get these results, then we will implement this. They won't make those kind of commitments. Now, just, tie it to the results.
Possible to make those type of commitments?
Yes, I'm wondering. I wish.
Is it possible to make those commitments?
Yes, in other words, based on results that we haven't even seen yet, if they do it again, and they say, okay, if it comes back this time like this, we commit to this, and then that way,
Well, the pendulum hasn't moved very far.
Right. No, and that's
The
really clear.
numbers are there.
Nationally,
The pendulum has not
The
moved.
numbers are there. The
Yeah.
question becomes,
It's a national debate, it's not a Cincinnati debate. We are flat in women-owned business growth for 10 years. It is an absolute, there's data behind where we are stalled. And I think that a night like tonight, where we can make connections and get together and really keep this discussion going, it's incumbent upon us to do that and not just simply point our finger towards policymakers. We have to do something at a grassroots level. So it's a national thing.
Okay, we're getting ready to wrap up because we do have to wrap up for tonight, but this has been great dialogue. I think that a lot of people got a lot of their feelings and concerns out about things about how they want to see the city go in the next 4 years. So we want to thank Roxanne, our next mayor. And while she's doing that, I do want to. Hold on, real quick, while she's doing that, I do want to point out we do have a lot of business owners in the room. So if you have cards on your way out, interact. We've got Miss Benita, who's got some sweet potato pies up here. We've got Miss Iris Rowley over here, who has a business. We've got all kinds of people in the room, so be sure you connect with everyone who's here before we leave out.
Thank you all for coming.
I know.
Okay, cool.
Yes.
I'm good with that.
I told
y'all help you with it. I know. You know how to organize. I know how to pontificate. Double flash. Now you got I'm a hell of a marketer. See?
What you read?
That's marketing. Well, the marketing, I'm good.
Call the name, call the door prize.
What you said.
We should do it.
Absolutely.
Let's get a scoping session together.
Sounds great.
On it.
I'm game.
Okay, let's see what we can do. I remember your situation.
Well, it's not the end of the
Full body
story.
massage.
Exactly.
No. I believe in redemption and resurrection.
You're very well spoken tonight.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Frankie.
But I did some Bound venture events and things like that. Maybe we bumped into down there. Well, let's try and put a scoping together. If you don't mind if I bumble around, I don't know where we start, but. All right, well, we'll put something together. I can at least host it in my office and get it going. Thanks,
I'm not a professional, but I'm the future, so.
Absolutely, I'm not dead yet either. We'll do that, thanks, Ash. Ashley expressed an interest to get you to college.
Eat some food too, we still got a little bit of food left.
Oh, no, you're fine.
All right, we have this.
Dropbox for all my file collaboration, so I'll shoot you an invitation to collaborate on Dropbox, and then you can have all the high res ones. Three, two, one, don't blink.
Give me 1, 2, 3. One more. 1, 2, 3. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Wonderful. Thank you. Carla, thank you very much. Pleasure being here. Yes, we do.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
The kind of comments in the beginning.
Yeah. Anytime. Thank you.
Definitely, let's get together, we will do so, and, I will.
Yeah, I got to meet her. I got her card. We're not so evolutionary now. Oh, you got everything covered here then? Or, oh, no. My husband, did I tell you my husband?
It's on our website, yeah.
Runner's World Challenge.
Let's do a quick drop for the, let's do it, where's my light? Where's my best light? We're gonna do a quick drop. I'm gonna ask you some questions. We're gonna talk real fast. Oh, here.
I think you do a wonderful job, and I know that you're going to Don't you think that Melanie and Center for People have a wonderful first time?
Well, what was I supposed to do with that?
Boy Scouts, so, see?
He hasn't been here. Absolutely, absolutely. I think that women's group thing, that would be an awesome thing to coordinate. Women entrepreneurs and even creating a voice. You know, I actually went all position.
Oh, it was that bad, but it was.
Not in downtown, so I think it was the project, you know, was right there. You know, we were just all so proud of her, and then